G'day guys, Dizzy Dave coming at you once again from Down Under with another edition of Behind the Classics. Today we are taking a look at Walt Disney's second feature film. It is the film that animation historian J.B. Kaufman would once call the one animated film that belongs in the true fraternity of epics, and is the first animated film to have ever won a competitive Academy Award. Released in 1940, it is of course Walt Disney's Pinocchio. During the production of Snow White, Walt Disney had initially planned to turn Felix Salten's book Bambi, which he'd bought the rights to, into his second animated feature. However, when production on the film began, it became rapidly clear that the story was incredibly difficult to adapt, and that animation hadn't yet progressed to the point where animals could be drawn realistically enough to maintain an entire film, let alone be the film's main characters. Leaving Bambi in production, yet conceding that the film would take longer to make than he'd initially thought, Walt instantly turned to Carlo Collodi's 1883 children's novel Pinocchio to be his second feature. Walt had initially planned on making Pinocchio the studio's third film, after being introduced to the story by artist Norman Ferguson, only months after he'd bought the rights to Bambi. Other reports claim that it may have been actor Douglas Fairbanks who suggested the idea of Pinocchio to Walt, yet regardless of how the story was introduced to him, according to Ferguson, Walt was busting his guts with enthusiasm over the possibility of a Pinocchio picture, and immediately went into production with engines roaring. Pinocchio itself was no small feat, and Walt realised that even with this picture, his animators would have to make various technological innovations. With this, Walt assembled larger production units than he'd ever used before, splitting artists and technicians into groups of specialty so different departments could focus on different elements all at the same time. If Walt's enthusiasm and determination to make Snow White was huge, it was utterly enormous in making Pinocchio. With the success of Snow White, spilling in more money than Walt could ever imagine, Walt felt like he could achieve absolutely anything. He believed that no idea was too big, no hurdle too large to cross. Walt not only poured millions into the construction of a new animation studio, but threw endless amounts at Pinocchio, believing it too could generate the adoration and box office results of Snow White. However, perhaps the confidence Snow White had given Walt and his animators clouded their judgment, and led to a hasty start of production. After 5 months' work, it became clear to Walt that the film wasn't what he'd envisioned. The production had become problematic, with the story and character depictions riddled with issues. Pinocchio was rude and unlikable, and it reflected on the rest of the picture, so Walt discarded a reported 2,300 feet worth of animation and went back to the drawing board to further refine the film's narrative. Walt soon realised that what had worked with Snow White may not work with Pinocchio, and scared of repeating himself, made the decision to make Pinocchio a more mature feature, a little darker, with less of the sight gags that had made Snow White so appealing to a younger audience. Walt wanted the film to be more real, and instructed effects animators to find new ways of making the world and its characters more realistic. Most notably, new techniques were developed for the fairy dust of the Blue Fairy's wand, vehicle movement, and natural elements such as smoke and lightning. In a sequence where Pinocchio and Geppetto fight off Monstro, the whale, animators developed new techniques to create realistic water that artist Frank Thomas called so real a person can drown in it. With the story back on track, Walt once again went hammer and nails at the film. He was just as involved with the production as he had been with Snow White, the box office takings from which he continued to pour into the film. Eventually, the film's budget reached a total of almost $2.3 million, the equivalent of $35.5 million in 2017. The budget of the film became so large that it eclipsed that of Snow White by almost twice the cost. This certainly wasn't helped by Walt's insistence that the film use celebrities as voice actors, employing the talents of singer Cliff Edwards, child actor Dickie Jones, and actress Evelyn Venable, among many others. Thanks to this, Pinocchio became the very first animation ever produced to include a celebrity voice cast, something which very quickly became a tradition. Sadly, though opening to generally positive reviews, the film failed at the box office, miserably. Thanks to the decreased number of cinema goers during the war, and the war's effect on international relations, thwarting its success in overseas markets, Pinocchio took in an unprecedented box office total of $84.2 million. The Disney studios filed for a loss of $1 million, and Walt became deeply depressed over the result. However, Through advancements in animation that had been made during the production of the film, not only was the face of animation changed by the Disney studios once again, but Bambi became a reality and was released as the studio's 5th film, 2 years later in 1942. Regardless of how disappointingly the film was received at the box office, Pinocchio still managed to make history when it became the first animated film to win a competitive Academy Award. Lee Harleen, Paul J. Smith and Ned Washington were awarded with an Oscar for their work on the film's score, and Harleen and Washington also received one for Best Original Song for When You Wish Upon a Star. The song has gone on to become one of the film's most widely known pieces of iconography, and not only has "Dreams Come True" become a slogan for the film, but also a trademark of the Disney Company and Disney theme parks around the world. The song has also become an anthem for the Disney Studios, where it's most notably used today in the opening logos of most Walt Disney Pictures productions. Pinocchio was one of the first Disney films I ever watched, and though a little dark and more mature than most Disney classics, even as a kid I loved the tale of Pinocchio. It was quite possibly my most watched Disney classic as a young child, and my admiration for Pinocchio and its whirlwind production has only grown over the years. We can thank Pinocchio, almost more than any other animated feature, bar perhaps Snow White, for taking animation into such a spectacular and mature realm, for transforming the idea of the cartoon into something completely different. The film's longevity is truly admirable, and I'm certain that if Walt were here today, he'd be proud of how important and praised his epic has become. Thank you for joining me for this installment of Behind the Classics. If you've enjoyed this mini documentation and would like to join me for future installments, to make sure you keep up to date, please, after the jump, hit subscribe. Thank you once again for watching, and to absolutely everybody out there, I hope you have a magical day.